Cool. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this session of Code Queens with our guest today, Jyoti. So, sharing a little about Jyoti. So, Jyoti is currently a DevRel at Harness, and she's a self-learned OSS expert hailing from a tier 3 college. She actually honed her skills with open source through multiple programs like MLH and other programs that she participated in. Later on, we were fortunate that she joined Codess.Cafe and she actually built out our entire OSS program. One of the interesting bits about that is that Jyoti actually tried to apply for Codess a couple of times, and at that time we had very small cohorts. So unfortunately, we were not able to accommodate her. But later on, she is the one who actually started teaching at Codess and built out an entire program. And her story is extremely interesting. Over a couple of conversations with her, I tried to deep dive into her story as to how she actually started in open source, how she grew, and her entire journey till now at Harness. So, Jyoti, thank you so much for taking out the time and really looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And Codess holds a very special place in my heart because I've worked about like 2-3 years now with Codess. So yeah, it really is a um, great opportunity to be back and talk to you again.
Awesome. Cool. So we'll start off with like a very simple question for anyone who is new to open source, right? Like what even is open source? We hear it a lot, but what does it really mean?
So basically, for example, you wrote a piece of code, right? And you haven't shared it with anyone on GitHub. Maybe your repository is private. And like I'm explaining it on a very low level. There are a lot of things, other things involved, like licenses and everything. But what happens is, so open source is basically something that can be modified and shared because it is publicly available, publicly accessible. But now when we talk about open source, we have started talking about, in software development especially, that if you're talking about open source projects or open source products, that means they work on the principles of open source, like they welcome collaborative participation, transparency, and also they work on a community-oriented development. So like basically, any code that is on GitHub that is public, you are allowed to like contribute on it. There is a community behind it. There are appropriate licenses involved, and there is collaborative participation. You can call that as open source.
Got it. So from what I understand, even Android is sort of open source, and even React, which is a framework by Facebook, that's also sort of open source, right?
Yeah. Android, I am not sure, but React is, yes, open source. Android, I would have to look. But do you remember there is this Brave browser?
Yeah, I use it actually.
Yeah, so these all things are open source. Brave is also open source, actually.
So you can actually go into the code and see, okay, how this thing is actually built. And if you want, you can compile it yourself also and use it, right? You don't have to download it from elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. You can like reciprocate it in your own laptop. They would have steps. Any good community-oriented project would have steps laid down on how you can run this in your own system.
Awesome. So how did you even find out about it? Because I'm assuming back in 2017, 18, when you started college, it was still very fresh in India. So how did you come across open source?
Okay, so it was 2019. I came back for code. Like we had COVID wave coming, right? So I came back home and I really did not understand data structures at that time. So like I was in second year. It was really hard for me. So in an environment where you're not going to college, you need to have great mentorship. I believe that personally, that mentorship is really important to go ahead. And I hail from a tier 3 college, so there was no scope of mentorship over there. But then I was reading randomly one day about open source. There was a friend of mine who talked about open source. He never told in depth what it is, but I was like curious to know. So I went on the internet and I found out that there are actually great products which have great developer communities with great mentors. So like they're going to guide you from the very start about how to contribute, and on the way you're going to learn coding as well, right? So coding, contributing with a mentorship, that sounded great to me. That just was something that I was looking for. And hence I started finding more things about open source. There was this book I read, just 150 pages. I don't remember the name of it even, about what is open source and everything. So yeah, I think that was what excited me the most. And there were fellowships and internships as well. And at that time, as a person who was transitioning into the third year, I just wanted an internship. So I think that is why I went into open source.
So it was more like a chance encounter that you just talked to a friend and then you found out, okay, there's something called open source and you
Yeah,
started.
exactly. Because nobody in my college did open source at that time. And there was no club or nothing I could join. So
Yeah.
only that friend, when he mentioned about open source, I was like, what is this? And then I went on YouTube and I searched, okay, this is an entire new world. And I got so interested about it. So I was like, okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, even now, I don't think there are open source clubs as such in college. There are like coding competition and competitive programming clubs, but no open source clubs still. Yeah.
Yeah, in my college, we do not have any club.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have any. I think the culture has grown now. A lot of colleges do have very active open source contributors, and
Yes.
they do have clubs, but I don't know if I know any of them very closely.
Okay, sure. So I remember this was also a personal struggle where there were a lot of opportunities, open source, then there was competitive programming. ML was very fresh because at that time there was a surge in
Huh.
cloud computing and computing power as such. So and
Mm.
even this Bitcoin was going up. So there was a lot of chatter about all this Web3 stuff. So how did you decide, okay, yeah, there's so much to do. I'll go ahead with open source. Like this is something that's I'm interested in.
Wow, that is a really good question because I was really confused. I was doing a lot of things. I was doing DSA, I was doing ML, I was doing full
Everyone.
stack development. Then I was like, I am getting nowhere. So I was like, let's just choose one project, stick to it, and go ahead.
Okay.
So, and I decided whatever open source project I choose, like according to my skill set, I'm going to be really truthful to them, right? And just whatever technologies come on the way, I'll learn it. So I think that is how it went on. As a naive second-year-old, I did not know that, okay, you have to choose different things, you have to do that and everything. The project that I really liked was FreeCodeCamp because I was learning coding on it and it is also open source. I got really happy, so I started contributing to that.
Got it. So basically, you just go head first into the first thing you saw, and then later on, you sort of basically kept going, and then you figured out, okay, this looks good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I shortlisted them based on my skills. So I wouldn't do like, if I am a person who knows JavaScript, I wouldn't go into something that is completely new to me. I can if I want to learn, but
Yeah.
if I want to start contributing, it would be much easier for me if I went head on with just the skills I know. But yeah, if you like a project that is out of your domain, you can of course start learning skills and then contribute.
So why was CodeCamp in your skill set? Was it like C++? What was it that you found okay with your skill set?
So FreeCodeCamp had the languages I was versed with. Plus, FreeCodeCamp was something that was really nice for me because it was the only platform that taught me coding so nicely. I was coding on it, and so I was a bit attached to it. So I was like, okay, if I am getting to learn coding for free, then why should I not contribute back to it? So it was just like that.
Got it. So would you say there's any sort of prerequisite to open source? Like you just mentioned, right? You had some languages that you could use to do on Go for on CodeCamp. Right? Anything else that you feel is very important to start open source?
I think the only prerequisites would be that maybe you know one or two languages that you want to contribute in. So for example, if you're going to contribute in code, right, and I'm going to a project that works completely on JavaScript.
Okay.
So if I have just the knowledge of C++, maybe I'm not able to contribute to it. I can learn on the way, but for that also the prerequisite is to learn, right? So I think the prerequisite would be to just learn a language or a tool or a framework that the project you are going to contribute to operates on or works on the major issues are on that. And then you can start contributing, because if you give me a code base, like I'm not saying you have to understand the entire code base, but if I'm giving a piece of code that is in JavaScript and I know C++, it will be hard for me to understand, right?
Makes sense.
I can Google and search, of course, but then again, that learning part comes into the picture again.
Yeah. So from what I understand, can I say that you should know at least one language, later on, let's say, even if you know C++ and the code base is in Java, you can still pick up Java. But if you know one language well, then it's easier to pick up other things.
Yeah, for code contributions. So in open source, you can even contribute design, you can contribute documentation as well. You can contribute maybe logos, anything you can contribute. So for anything, if you know anything, so maybe you know graphic designing and you want to revamp the entire website of an open source project or their logos and everything. So you can contribute in that as well. But the only thing that is a prerequisite is that you should know something that overlaps with that project.
Makes sense. So tell me one thing. So I also tried to do open source once, which was for this Google Summer of Code, right? For me,
Okay.
it was a very foreign thing, and I just tried for a week and I dropped it. For me, it was very hard for some reason. I don't know why. I was kind of acquainted with CP, so I found it easier. But from that, I realized, okay, there are probably some properties or some traits that are there in a person that would, make you more fit or make you gel with the community more so that you can go ahead. So do you think that there are any such traits that are very important to stick in, sorry, you can say, I mean, continue in open source, anything that will definitely help you?
I think every beginner feels that way, the way you felt, because it can be very daunting for a new
Yeah.
project, like to start a new project,
Mhm.
because you are not aware of it and
Yeah.
maybe it is difficult. I would suggest do a lot of reading. They have a lot of documentation. So
Mhm.
every project, if you're going to read their docs, you're going to see their videos, you're going to be well versed about what the product is, what the project is trying to do, what the project is trying to solve. And you can reach out to the mentors when you feel like you want to contribute, but you are stuck somewhere. So the mentors in the open source community are really helpful. So they will be the ones who will be guiding you in the correct direction. So for example, you gave me a new project and I don't understand anything about it. What the first thing that I'll do is I'll just go and read through the documentation, see tutorials, see videos, try it out for myself, just play around with it so that I understand what the product is, what the project is. Then only I can start contributing, because if I do not know what the product or project is, I won't be able to understand how it is going to work. And then you can choose an issue that is good for you. So for example, we usually use good first issue tag on the GitHub issues, which are for beginners.
Okay.
So if you are a beginner, so you can filter via label and you can search for all the good first issue labeled issues. You can choose one that is not taken up by anyone else and you can start contributing on it. Talk to your mentor. Maybe it can be very easy. My first issue was a grammar fix. There was a line, there was a full stop
Okay.
missing and a spelling mistake. I just fixed that. So it's totally okay. I
Yeah.
think the major part was that how I clone it into my
Mm.
laptop, how I make the
Mm.
changes, how I commit it, how I push it, and how I get it merged. So I think, yeah, it's just step by step.
Got it. So can I say, I mean, from what you just said, I think the property or one trait I can attribute to you is you have to be very patient, right? Initially, you have to be very
Yeah.
patient and you also have to be, I think, sort of very determined that, okay, I want to do this and then power through, I think, a couple of first times you face some hiccups. And once I think you are comfortable, then I think you can pull through. But initially, you have to be very, I think, determined and what do I say? I think patient. Yeah. Can I say that? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Next would be so you mentioned that you got a mentor, right? I was very fascinated with that. When I tried, I didn't get any mentor. Maybe I didn't about it the right way. But how did you
Oh,
get a
there are
mentor?
mentors listed actually on the page. So
Okay.
you go to any open source community. So for example, you went for GSOC, right?
Yeah.
There are different projects under GSOC, right? So you will have different proposals, and in front of that, you will have mentors written. So you can just use any mailing chat or
Mm-hmm.
any, like maybe they use Slack, maybe they use Discord or anything, and you can just put in the general channel. I wouldn't recommend like personally DMing mentors, but
Okay.
like you can just ask them. If you put out your question in the community also, right, without tagging the mentors, you will be helped by a lot of people in the community who are already contributing, who were
Mm-hmm.
once beginners like you. So maybe
Right.
you can try that as well.
Got it. So it seems like for anyone who's from a tier three college or maybe there's not a lot of great mentorship or support around them, it's I think open source can be very helpful for them.
I think so because it really helped me.
Mm.
I think it can help. If it can help me, a person who had
Yeah.
no background in coding, so I
Mhm.
think it can help people as well.
Yeah. So I guess now that we understand open source well, and I think some of the important points about it, let's talk about your journey, right? So how did you actually start open source? I think you briefly mentioned the first was a grammar fix. Like, but how did you, and was
Yeah.
it in CodeCamp only? Like there only you started?
Yeah, it was FreeCodeCamp.
Acha, so you just identified, okay, this is where I want to work. Found some like grammatical issue in one of the, I think, readmes or something, probably.
Yeah.
And readme you just went on and made a pull request and
Yeah.
said, I'll fix it.
So after that, I started looking into open source programs, which would
Okay.
teach me probably contribution or would give me a chance to grow and work with teams. Okay. So I started applying for MLH, which is Majorly Hacking Fellowship.
Yeah.
And they give this wonderful opportunity for you to work with different open source companies or projects. I say projects as well because there are many companies who have closed source as well, open source projects as well.
Yes.
It can be, it could be Facebook, it could be Django, it can be AWS. So we had a lot of projects at that time. So I started applying. It was tough to get in because of the competition.
Yeah.
But what you have to show to them is a project that you build, right? So I started working on building a project for them.
Okay.
For the application, and you have to fill out a long application, and then you have to go through 2 interviews, and then if you are matched with a pod, you're given a seat. So I was very interested in going to their open source track, and I started preparing for that. And in the first try, I was deferred in the sense that
Sure.
I passed through 2 interviews, but I was not able to be matched with a pod that was working on the same projects as me. So, for example, if you are working on JavaScript, you will be matched to a pod that works on JavaScript. At that time, it was like that. It might have changed now. So at that time, I was not um, given a position in a pod. So I was deferred to the next fellowship. So I applied in December for the January fellowship, but I had to join it in summers because at that time, in those 3 months, there was no spot left. So yeah, so I think that started my journey through open source after I joined MLS and started working. And yeah, that was the very, very, very start of open source for me.
Got it. So initially you mentioned, right, you have to be very, I think, patient, you have to have a lot of perseverance. So what was that initial month like where you started seeing, okay, because for someone who's in college, second year or third year, seeing a code base which is probably hundreds and thousands of files is very daunting, right? So what was your initial experience like going through the code base?
So for me, as any naive person, I started reading the code base to understand how it is connected, but I did not have to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, it was very daunting because I was a person who sucked at coding. Okay, I did not know how to code. To be saved from DSA, I came in open source because I wasn't able to understand. But then I was like, so this is something that I started liking because of all the support I had. If I did not know how anything is working, I could just ask in the community that, hey, I'm not able to understand this. Is there any prerequisite reading I need to do to understand this? So I had a lot of support that way. Even in MLS, you are given designated pod leaders and mentors for the project. So you can just ask them if there is something wrong. So they are going to tell you and they're going to help you around with it. So I think it was daunting, but if you have help on the way, you're going to go through.
Got it. And did you find any particular resource very helpful? Like you mentioned, there are videos, then there was also a book. Then I'm assuming there are some online courses also now on how to start OSS. Anything that you would recommend?
I think YouTube videos are the best to go these days because even Meta has their own tutorial about how to start contributing to open source. Yeah, so companies and even developers now make videos. So I think you can see a lot of YouTube videos about how to contribute to open source. They will also recommend you the websites where you can find open source projects. So I think YouTube is the way to go for now.
Yeah, but I think now there's a lot of influences in India also. One very famous one, which I think most people know, Kunal Kushwaha. He also, I think he started the wave of open source in India once he mentioned what are the benefits and everything. So that would be, I think, one good channel to probably kickstart your journey. Any other channels that you would recommend, just in general, if you know of any other YouTubers or any books that you may want to recommend?
I do not have any YouTubers on the top of my head as of now, but there was this video by, I think, Facebook itself. I'll just see once. I think they have FreeCodeCamp also had a website. Yeah. Okay. So Eddie made a video on FreeCodeCamp about guide to open source, complete guide to open source. So I think that was a very good tool as well.
Got it. So you can say Meta has a course, then Eddie, and from
It
free.
doesn't have a course. It has like a small video, if I remember correctly. And yeah.
Okay, so these would be, I think, more than enough. And I think
Yeah.
most important is just go and start it, right? You can
Yeah.
do a lot of
See
prep,
two,
but
three videos, choose the
yeah,
project you like, start contributing, get deeper into it. Yeah,
I think the best way to start is anyway get your hands dirty in any field, right? You can learn as much as you want, but you have to get started.
exactly.
Okay, so now one of the things which I think I found extremely fascinating when I was talking to Jyoti was she had, through her campus placements, a very, very good job opportunity. One opportunity, I think she had a couple. One is which most people in India, I think, try for and strive for to, get into that company one day. She had that kind of an offer. Plus, she had a lot of, I think she had a couple of opportunities in open source as well. And when she told me that she's joining open source instead of that company, I was very surprised. But later, I think she boiled it down for me, like as
Yeah.
to why she did it. And then I was very convinced and realized what is the potential of open source. So, Jyoti, I think maybe you can share briefly about, the story, maybe if possible, and then how did you come to that decision?
Yeah, so I actually got an offer as a DevRel engineer, and the offers I was getting on campus were for SDs or
Hmm.
like the professional entry level engineering roles, right?
Yeah.
Which were good. Like by the time, don't get me wrong, by the time I sat for my placements, I had a good amount of DSA done. Okay, so that is why I was able to pass those interviews and those
Hmm.
exams. But the company that offered me the DevRel engineer role, I was working with them for almost an year as an intern
Hmm.
as well. So I got their full-time offer before my graduation ended, 3 months
Hmm.
before my graduation ended.
Okay.
And it was not a comparison of the companies, but it was a comparison of the roles. So I wanted to get into DevRel engineering instead of an SDE. So that is why I chose that role. And it was an open source. So that was like a feather in the hat. So I was like, okay, let's go. I am going to work on open source. I'm going to work building communities and in community engagement as well. So let's do that because that is the role that I really, really wanted to work on because I worked on it and for a year. So that is why.
Got it. So majorly it was more about, I think, experience, comfort with the role that drove you towards open source rather than the other offers.
Yeah, I really liked DevRel Engineer as a career. I worked on it for like an hour, not an hour, for a year.
Yeah.
So I really, really liked it. So at the
Hmm.
end, it was really tough to decide whether I should go for an SD role or I should go for a DevRel
Hmm.
Engineer role. But I think just a lot of brainstorming and just a lot of decision making. At the end, I chose DevRel. So yeah.
It's like, what was the deciding factor? I think one you mentioned was obviously familiarity with the role. Any other thing that kind of pushed you towards that direction? Like, what was
So
that thought?
I working in open source, as I mentioned, right, there are a lot of community collaborations and I worked with a lot of communities. So
Hmm.
with DevRel, I got a chance to work with those communities, to grow those communities, to engage with those communities. I think that is was the most important factor for me,
Hmm.
that I needed a role where there is no, which is community facing.
Hmm.
So I think that was the major um, point for deciding that.
Got it. And did your experience in open source help you at all in the SD interviews?
It did actually. So, a lot of companies, if they see open source contributions on a resume, they get an idea, okay, this person had, if they are code contributions, there is proof, right, that your code is out there in production or
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
something that you've written or
Hmm.
documentation that you've written. So they can just go and see. So that helps a lot. It's basically having an experience without having a work experience, right? So
Hmm.
like you have, if you work for big projects, okay, so you have worked with teams, you have worked with engineering teams, you have contributed to a code base that is being used by a lot of people. So I think that sets a very good um, image. And apart from image, it gives you also the experience that you need because when you're going to go into a role in an SD role, they are going to teach you things. And for
Yeah.
you, it will be easier to catch on because you already have that experience of contributing to a code base that is new and not familiar to you.
Hmm. So from that perspective, I can think that even if you don't want to go into open source, I think trying it a couple of times would definitely be helpful because it gives you a lot of exposure. And you understand okay how things work in the real life. So it will make
Yeah,
like one is you get familiar, second it will make actually transitioning into an SD role much easier once you start with any company.
yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
So one, I think you mentioned DevRel. I'm just very curious what all roles are there because I think if you go to any MNC, you have your typical
Mm.
SD, then manager, product manager, designer, etc. But from what I know, open source, there are very interesting roles. So if you can, share, put some light on it.
Okay, yeah. So open source will have like sort of same responsibilities. Like they will have an engineer, they will have developers, like they will have application developers, they will have engineers who are working on the code base, like that. But they also have code maintainers, they also have community managers. A lot of corporates have also started doing community management and developer advocacy.
Mhm.
But like they will have roles like open source maintainer who's
Mhm.
going to maintain the code and just look after it. They're going to have community manager who manages the community that comes and talks to each other. Like they maybe they hold officers and everything.
Mhm.
They'll also have developer advocates who are going to, if your company is like a lot of startups are also doing that, which might be closed source as well. So this is not just specific to open source. But yeah, it has typical roles like they will have a growth team, they will have an engineering team, they will have a marketing team, they will have a design team. So
Mhm.
they will have that. They will have some additional roles as well, which a lot of people might not have heard of. Like, what is community manager? What is a developer advocate? So yeah.
Got it. And these roles, are they only restricted to people who have, let's say, engineering experience or have a background in computer, sorry, you can say coding, or are they open to anyone? Like, let's say, if someone is a designer, they
No,
can
they
get
are
into.
open to anyone.
Okay.
I remember I worked with people
Mhm.
who learned coding even though they were a BSc in chemistry. So I've seen people like that as well. For example, design team you do not need right coding experience
Mhm.
most of the times. There will be roles that will require you to know coding. For example, developer advocacy and community managers can ask. It depends on the company, honestly, what they're hiring.
Sure.
If they require you to be a person who is comes from a management background and not from an engineering background, maybe that's okay for them as well.
Got it. Now, I'm very curious. Okay, so when you are an SD, your growth ladder is very obvious. You start as an SD one, two, three, then you become an engineering manager or an IC, and then you keep growing in that ladder. So I am very, I think, interested in knowing. You mentioned developer advocate, right? And then community manager, even DevRel. So how do these roles go? Is there a ladder for these roles as well? Like, is it also well defined?
Oh, so there is no defined ladder actually. It differs from company to company. They
Mm-hmm.
could have a DevRel, then a senior DevRel, then a principal DevRel. It depends on them. Or
Achha.
they can transition into a different role. I've
Mhm.
also seen that marketing roles combined with developer advocacy
Mhm.
or de- uh, deviated from them if they are a combined team. So it doesn't have like a ladder,
Okay.
like is defined for the SD roles,
Mhm.
because I think it is because with open source you have a lot of independence with creativity, right?
Hmm.
So you can be a community manager, you can be a senior community manager. After that, what role suits you? I think that only the company and you can decide. But
Okay.
yeah, so there is no like specific ladder as such because I've seen different I've seen technical evangelists, I've
Mhm.
seen senior technical evangelist, I
Okay.
have seen lead of technical evangelist. So
Okay.
like it is different from
Okay.
role to role.
So, okay, I'm very curious. Is open source like as a opportunity or the roles in open source, like, is it still settling in? Like, because I'm assuming it's a recent phenomena. So, are people still settling in building things, or like there's no, I think, more lot of revamp that will go on. It's just that beyond the point, you have to figure out how you grow in the company.
Okay, so open source is not something that is recent because Linux is also open source and it has been around for so
Right.
many years, right?
Right.
But you can say the culture might be relatively new, but it is not that new because there have been open source companies, right,
Mhm.
who have worked on open source model themselves. But to say that it is a very new phenomenon, that would be a bit wrong. But yeah, I think adoption is new. So a lot of people are adopting that model. A lot of people are adopting it. So I think that is really new. Even developer advocacy, you see, it has been on the rise for the past 3-4 years. Before that, it was not something that was a lot heard. So, yeah.
Okay, so maybe OSS, the companies who are working on OSS, they have still a lot of, I think, growing up to do, or maybe the roles that are being defined, right? They may mature in the coming time, and then you have better ladders defined for people. Maybe that is still yet
I
to.
think because of the creativity that and the independence that we have, I like they do have in engineering, they have their ladders.
Okay.
In other roles that are not so conventional, there may be a bit more structure coming up, but some companies already have a very good placed structure. So to say that structure is going to replicate in all the other companies, I don't think so that is going to happen. Or it might happen, but maybe new companies after some time, they are going to set up a proper ladder if they are startups, but some already established companies do have that ladder.
Got it. Now I wanted to learn about more of what you do, right? What does a DevRel do, and what does your day-to-day look like in your company today?
Okay, so I work at Harness currently, and so I joined their office in Bangalore, and developer advocacy can differ from a developer relations engineer. This as a role can differ from company to company. What I work on currently is the content creation and the technical writing majorly.
Okay.
So there's a lot of documentation. So I do not work on open source right now.
Okay.
I work for cloud cost management. Okay. So like I work on technical documentation. It is public. These are public facing docs that the customers or the users or the new people are going to see.
Okay.
And so I work on revamping them, updating them, and just taking care of them that they are very up to date and very technical and very in depth. Apart from that, there is a lot of content creation as well, like blog writing. It could be videos as well, and everything. So as I can say, in all of my roles that have been taken up by me in the past few years, one thing remained common was it was always community/customer facing mostly, right? Not it could be directly or it could be indirectly. If I am working with say external collaborations, it's indirect, right? That I'm collaborating and then somebody else is working on a podcast, but I am the person behind it. So I think that remained common with all the companies I worked with.
Got it. So one thing that happens with your typical SDE roles, right, which kind of attracts a lot of people, especially in India, is that after a certain point, you can probably go abroad, right? So in Google, it's there. In Amazon, you probably go to the US. In Microsoft also, you can migrate after a couple of years. So are there any similar opportunities in open source as well?
Okay, so for open source, if your company is based out of India, so you get a lot of opportunities to work on remote companies as well, with remote companies as well. So you have remote work, and if they're based out of India, chances are, if you want, they can invite you out, right? If they can help you with the location, if that is something in the company's scope. Otherwise, we do have conferences like open source summits. There are international conferences where you can go and participate. If this is something too expensive for you, you can always apply for scholarships based on your merit, based on your diversity criteria and a lot of criterias. I would recommend going to open source summits and just viewing that once. And there are a lot of different conferences also, even for technical writers and for open source enthusiasts. There are a lot of conferences. So yes, I would say there are a lot of opportunities if you're looking for.
Okay. And I think along with going abroad being a major consideration, one more is salary. I think everyone in college, one thing on top of their head is getting a good salary. So
Yeah.
what does it look like for an SD in an MNC versus someone who is pursuing, open source?
Okay, so I would say it can differ from project to project, but what I have seen is that the salaries in open source are at par with the SDEs in India that we are working with. So I have seen people with salaries that are approximately the same or a bit better or just like at par. So I wouldn't say that it is a very low paying job or something like that. But yeah, if you are skilled enough and you're good enough in your art and your craft, I think you have the potential to just get the same package as an SDE.
Got it. So it actually depends on your skill set, and it can be at par as well. Yeah, in general, you can say on average, it's at par with.
It is. In my experience, I've seen it is at par.
Okay. Okay, lastly, I just want to understand from the entire conversation, right? If anyone is starting today, 2024, right? How do they venture into open source? Any advice you have for them?
Okay, very straightforward. First, if you don't know what open source is, go to YouTube, find
Yeah.
out about open source. If you do not know GitHub, learn how to make contributions. Mostly in open source tutorials, they tell you. Second, there are many websites where you can choose an open source project from. Go on those websites, choose a project you like, and which is an active project. There are projects where the contributions haven't been happening. If you're a person who wants GSOC or something like that, for GSOC, just go and look into the archives and the organizations that participate each year. Okay. And you can start to try to contribute to them. Okay. They are the organizations you can contribute to. Start contributing by looking at the good first issues or just wandering around, looking into documentation. It's okay if you do not understand what the project is, give it a week, give it 10 days, understand what the project is about. If you still need help, go watch tutorials, go ask the mentors or the community in general. Then I would say once you have some contributions under your hat, apply for some open source projects, fellowships, where you can go and work with even bigger companies, even with bigger projects. Okay. You can go for MLS, you can try for GSOC, you can try for other. For beginners, I would not recommend a GSOC as of yet. You can try MLH fellowship because they have a very, very good culture and environment of collaboration and mentoring. So you can go over there, apply, try. So these are the only things that you need to know. If it takes time, it takes time. It's okay. It's all right. But the skills you're going to learn on the way, even if you do not make it to the final destination is not to get into these programs, but to learn how to contribute and contribute to open source actually, right? So I would just recommend that. It's very straightforward. Just learn, revise, learn, revise.
Awesome. Lastly, I think one opportunity for anyone out there, especially I think women, we do have the open source program that Jyoti created,
Yay.
and now being I think mentored by Akanksha. So I think if anyone is interested, that would be a good starting point, or is it someone for someone who already has some experience and then they should come in?
No, I would. So when we started this program, you and I, we created it specifically for people who are very new. So if you are a woman in tech, please come and see our program. I'm pretty sure you're going to love it. You're going to enjoy it because we conduct regular workshops and we talk to you regularly. And we tell you how to contribute to open source. And we bring on the people who have done GSOC, done MLH, and give you an opportunity to talk to them directly. So I would say if you are a beginner in open source, but you have the passion to learn, I would just recommend applying. It's just a very good mentorship program. Of course, it's free. Of course, that is something that is not needed to be outlined. But yeah, of course, try it out.
Awesome, cool. That was the podcast. Thank you so much, Jyoti, for taking out the time. Yeah, really appreciate it, and lovely talking to you as always.
Same. I just feel so nice. I'm just reflecting back on my own journey now, and I'm going to think that, okay, it feels so weird that I remember I used to sit on my terrace in winters, just hopelessly crying in front of laptop because I do not understand any piece of code. But then slowly, like it all is going to be good at the end. But
It
yeah,
all
it was
works out
great
very
talking.
well.
Thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Okay, bye.